Welcome to the Principles of Performance podcast, where we discuss how to optimize your health, fitness, and performance. Drawing on decades of experience of working as coaches, consultants, and trainers to top performers, athletes, and teens from professional sports to top universities to the U.S. military, Eric DeGatti and Mike Perry discuss topics and strategies of how to perform at your highest level and be your very best. Join us and our friends and colleagues who are leaders in the fitness and performance industry as we investigate and challenge the most popular training, nutrition, lifestyle, and recovery protocols. And away we go with the Principles of Performance podcast. We are on episode number 23, and we have a good one coming up. But before we tell you all about that, I am Eric DeGatti, your host, along with my co-host, Mr. Michael Perry. Mike, how are you today?
You know, living the dream. We had a half inch of snow last night in Boston. You would have think it was the blizzard of 78. People just forgot how to drive. So that's always a fantastic experience. But we're doing well, man. We're doing well.
That's unique. Usually in Boston, you handle it better than we do here. And I think we actually ended up getting more than you, but we digress. We have an interesting and a great one lined up today because we have a good friend of ours who's actually a co-host with you on another show. So we're being somewhat incestuous on this show here, bringing in our great friend, Brett Jones. He's, for those of you who don't know who he is, he's a certified athletic trainer, strength and conditioning specialist based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He's got a BS master's in rehabilitative sciences, certified strength and conditioning specialist, been doing this over 20 years. And he's consulted with teams and athletes all over the world. He's originally an athletic trainer who transitioned into the fitness industry. And most of you know him for teaching kettlebell techniques, which he's been teaching since 2003. And he's the director of education for StrongFirst. He's also a teacher with us at Functional Movement Systems. That's how Brett and I first met. He's been there since 2006. He's got me beat by a couple years. And he's created a bunch of DVDs with the boys, including Gray Cook and the famous Secrets of series, which is what most people don't know was the genesis for the level 2 course that we have. And he's also an advisory board member for FMS and helps work on curriculum stuff. And it is just awesome to have him as a key component of our industry. And it's a blessing to have him as a colleague and a friend. Brett Jones.
Eric, Mike, thank you so much. Now that you've set the bar that high, I'm just going to try to slide right underneath it as we get through the podcast. So it's just great to have a chance to be on, and maybe this will be funny in some ways.
I certainly expect nothing less than that. So we'll start the clock now, see how long it takes to get totally off the rails. But Perry, try to have some semblance of order here, and you start off the questions.
It's Brett and I. There's not going to be any sense of order whatsoever. All right, Brett. So listen, I know all the answers to this stuff because I've known Brett for a very, very long time. But for our listeners that don't know Brett, so Brett, what was the turning point that drove you to pivot from the traditional athletic training into fitness and what you do now?
So I was my first job out of grad school as an athletic trainer was a small military academy in a very small town in Virginia, which the three of us are familiar with, the metropolis of Chatham, Virginia, about 1,200 people. But that also happens to be the hometown of Gray Cook. So I'm down there working as an athletic trainer, and Gray walks into my training room one day, asks if I need any help. And that led to the development of a great friendship and working in his clinics and my training room together and doing a bunch of stuff. And then I actually, and I laugh about this now because I can remember being in one of my freshman athletic training classes with Rick Proctor, who was my head trainer at High Point University, where I went to get my bachelor's in sports medicine. He's like, look, if you're going to do this, you got to love sports. Well, fast forward 6, 7, 8 years. And I'm like, I don't like sports. Or it was the hundreds, thousands of hours that I had watched thus far that made me go, yeah, I just can't watch another practice. And so I was looking for other opportunities and to change things up, get back up. My ex lived in that area, the New Bethlehem, Clarion area. So my transition was basically a job change where I went back to where I had gotten my master's in the Clarion, PA area, and I ran a hospital fitness center for 5 years. And in doing that, that's when I got certified with Pavel in 2002, and then started later and right around 2002, I also changed jobs and worked from the hospital fitness center to a private club in Pittsburgh called the Duquesne Club Health and Fitness Center, and worked there for a couple of years, then went out to San Diego. So short story long, it was a job change that took me from athletic training to personal training. And when I transitioned into that hospital fitness center, I was like, man, how do you do this job without being a certified athletic trainer? Because we were transitioning people from, we were based in a PT clinic. So we were transitioning people from, we were doing post-rehab before post-rehab was the thing. So we were transitioning people from the rehab program, physical therapy, into this wellness program. And I was working with orthopedic issues, joint replacements, neurological issues like Parkinson's, stroke, wheelchair bound, amputees, everything was coming through the door. And I'm like, man, how do you do this without having, a much higher level of education than I like to work out? So that was, yeah, short story long. That's how I made the transition into fitness.
All right, so let's pick up with the kettlebell part of the story, because you're very well known for your expertise in kettlebells. And so, what kind of originally sparked the interest in that world?
One of my former employees, somebody that I knew, came back in and said, "Hey, you should check out this Pavel guy." And at that point, it was Power to the People, one of his original books, which was a minimalist strength program, deadlift and side press, and kind of an anti-bodybuilding message. And kind of was, you read the book, and especially, I throw myself back to that circa 2000 individual, the year 2000 individual, and I'm like, man, just mind blown with some of the stuff that was in there. And so I was deadlifting, I was doing my presses, I made the shift into focusing on strength. And then they came out with the Russian Kettlebell Challenge book, and I bought it, I got it, I read it, I put it in a drawer. I'm like, that's all cool, but I can do this with a dumbbell. Throw it in a drawer. And I'm like, oh, okay. Scratching at the back of my skull. So I pull it back out and I try one of the, I knew how to do a dumbbell snatch. So I tried to do one of the snatch routines, but with a dumbbell. And I like to joke, and it is a joke, that hooked up a 50-pound dumbbell, tried this workout or something that was in the back of the book. And once EMS revived me, I said, well, I should probably go get trained in this, which is a joke. There were no emergency services involved. And that was kind of the push that I needed. And then I got my first kettlebell in late 2001, and very quickly started to realize that the thick handle offset center of mass really was a different and unique tool. And since getting certified in February of 2002, I just haven't looked back. It's been the mainstay of my training for 22 plus years now.
So I keep in a little history lesson here. I'd like to kind of dive a little bit into the historical stuff, because I know you're big on that, and
Mm-hmm.
I kind of geek out on the history of strength training. Like, one of my favorite books was The Great Sandow, talking about Eugene Sandow, who was a strongman back at the turn of the 20th century. And he would go around, before they had movies, they'd go around and do these strongman exhibitions. And when you see pictures of him in the book, he looks like your regular beach bro in terms of his body. He wasn't anything magnificent, but insanely strong, kind of to your point of bodybuilding and strength not being necessarily the same thing. And actually, a little tidbit is the trophy for Mr. Olympia is modeled after, it's the Sandow trophy after Eugene Sandow. So I know you're really good with the history stuff. The kettlebell, that was brought in, the trainer from The Biggest Loser, when she introduced that's how it came to America, correct?
If we were in the same room, I would reach across the room and smack that right out of your mouth. That's good. No, the kettlebell is interesting, has a pretty varied history. in the US, the current state of kettlebell training is due to Pavel Tsatsouline, who had, like I said, had gotten started with some other books on flexibility and deadlift and, you know, things like that. And then while having some steaks with some friends and talking about kettlebell training, he was encouraged to go ahead and put it out there. Like, let's get people doing this. He's like, no, you don't understand. Nobody's going to want to do it. It's really hard work. And, you know, but, you know, here we are, 20 plus years later. Kettlebell first appears in the Russian dictionary somewhere in the 1600s. So it's been around for a very long time. Some of the history that I know of is that originally, and they were the weights were given in poods. So 1 pood, 16 kilo, 1.5 pood, 24 kilo, 2 poods, 32 kilo, were actually weights that were used for like measuring crops, measuring where we use bushels and things like that. They used poods. And so you don't put a group of individuals together with a bunch of weights laying around for very long before some sort of competition or look what I can do, hold my beer, watch this sort of thing gets started. And so you can pull it back even further. There's evidence that kettlebell-like implements have been used for a very long time, but then more codified into a form of training in Russia in the 1600s. And then, you know, coming forward into today. So it's interesting. It's muddied. I wish we could draw a straight line, but the kettlebell has apparently taken a non-linear path. But current state of kettlebell training in the world right now, largely due to Pavel's influence, bringing it into the mainstream. And there is kettlebell sport. There is a contested internationally competed sport of gear voice sport or kettlebell lifting. And so that's a completely different thing than what I teach and what I do. But yeah, it's an interesting, muddy conversation.
Now, fast forwarding to today in the training and in the utilization of kettlebells, what do you see as some of the biggest misconceptions, including, is it properly pronounced kettlebell?
Correct. It's kettlebell or kettlebell, also, or kettleball, or we get many derivations, and people get upset about that. I don't. If you're interested in the tool and you want to pick it up, awesome. Call it whatever. Call it Bob. I don't care. We get it in your hands. Let's start using it. Little details about what the name of it is can be fixed later. I think probably a big misconception is that it's not an ideal tool for building strength. It's seen more as a Metcon tool or a conditioning tool, but I think it's a tremendous power and strength tool. And so I think that opening the doors a little bit to the benefits and what you can get out of kettlebell training is probably, you know, where it would need to go. Because, you know, honestly, you mentioned She Who Shall Not Be Named in the previous show that shall not be named. And, you know, you see some of these applications of this tool and you're like, man, I would never touch one of those. I agree. If that was what I had seen for kettlebell training, I wouldn't want to touch it either. You know, get to a good instructor, a StrongFirst instructor that can show you how to access this tool in a very safe manner, and begin to realize that, as I said initially, that thick handle, offset center of gravity, it's unique. And the loaded eccentric position that we get into is unique. And I think that those are areas where there's tremendous benefit.
All right, so we're going to switch gears a little bit. So we often talk about the difference between being good at an exercise and being strong. So Brett, how would you define strength in general and describe what you see are good quality expressions or gauges of true physical strength?
Well, I think it's an interesting conversation because if we were talking about basketball, you know, he's not a good free throw shooter. He just has good technique. That doesn't make sense, right? He's not a good golfer. He just has good technique. Well, he's not that strong. He just has good technique. No, strength is good technique. those two things are married in a way that we don't separate for other activities, but yet, and it could be, self-esteem or some personally driven issues where we're trying to give ourselves an excuse for not being as strong as we could be, and saying that, oh, he's not that strong, he just has good technique. That doesn't apply to any other sporting analogy that you put it to. And so realizing that technique is a display of strength, and strength can be a display of technique. Those two things should be married, not separated. If you go a little more textbook, strength is your ability to generate force under given conditions, whether that's an internal load where we're doing something like a one-arm push-up, or whether that's manipulating an external load. It is your ability to generate force under given conditions. Strength is a many splendored thing. The ballet dancer that's on stage doing things that I would break if I tried to do, the NFL football player, the strongman competitor, the youth athlete, all of these are displays of strength in many different ways. So defining strength in a broader sense, I think is a more useful conversation.
So let's throw a word out there that's been bastardized to the hill, and it's part of a company that we all work for, is functional, right? And talk about functional strength is, strength coaches will say, well, you're just good at bench, squat, clean, or bench, squat, and deadlift. And there is a component of, we had John Tureen on last week, and we were talking about, he took all the record boards because the guys who were the best at those lifts weren't the best on the field. So in terms of strength that actually carries over, like the way I describe it in our course is, I say, if you work out all the time, but you still can't help me move a couch, your program sucks. So what does functional strength mean to you?
Well, you kind of tiptoed on it there. It is your ability to be useful in a variety of ways. I think that, and we're talking about transfer here, right? So we can, my brain's going about 5 different directions right now in background processing.
Let's go to all of them.
Yeah. I don't know that you want to do that. But I think that we're talking about transfer. We're talking about the ability of you being stronger to make you better at a variety of things. And just a quick example, when I went to my original certification in February of 2002 and learned how to kind of unlock my hips and produce power the way we do in the swing, I went from barely touching the bottom of the net to being able to grab the rim. So my vertical leap saw a many inch increase in moments because I learned how to unlock my hips and I learned how to use my hips in a more useful fashion. My max squat at that point was about 365. Fast forward a few years when I'm powerlifting and I have a max squat in competition belt only of 518. And I'm back to just getting the bottom of the net. I did not have the hops that I had at that particular event. So is there a point of getting too focused on strength? Yes. That is at a very elite level for most people. For in general, if you're stronger, you're gooder. And that is, until proven otherwise, I would argue that getting stronger can make a good difference. But when you get super focused on some very locked into certain pattern lifts, bench, squat, dead being good examples, the having something that transfers that strength into a more usable fashion is always needed. And sometimes it's you gotta pull the person back and say, look, and this is the brilliance of having a baseline or having something like the FMS, the FCS, and having your minimums in place. Like, dude, you are way over the minimum for this position, for this sport. Let's focus on something else. So yeah, I think that we just got to have some metrics that tell us we've gone too far in one direction. We need to change course.
And I think an important take home with that is it's not an either or. jump and dive into the cesspool of Twitter and like I say, if you want to waste an hour, take 10 minutes on Twitter. And you'll hear the arguments of it's all strength and it's barbells and nothing else, or it's, don't touch barbells and it's all functional and that kind of thing. And it's like, why do you have to choose? I don't understand why it has to be these polar sides of it, where really you can kind of contrast both and they all fit in. And I think that's circling back to the misconceptions of kettlebells. Is we do something in the course where we talk about kind of, what's your thing and getting out of your silos. And we will sometimes pull somebody from the course up from who's a kettlebell person, quote unquote, and say, okay, everybody, before he tells you or she tells you what they actually do, someone who's not familiar with kettlebells, tell us what you think they do. Right. And what that stereotype of what that is of, oh, well, it's just, a bunch of, kind of hipsters with beards and man buns and Patagonians. And all they do is, swing kettlebells and get ups, and they don't do any other exercises. It couldn't be further from the truth. Like, even within your curriculum, you have body weight training, you have barbell training, kind of talk about the diversity and where it's just a part of and there's really more concepts that has been my big takeaways from stuff I've learned from Pavel and principles than it is just the device.
Absolutely. The high tension techniques, the way we teach people to be stronger transfers to any tool. I don't care what you're lifting, sandbag, kettlebell, barbell, body weight. I don't care. The principles, the techniques transfer, and that's really key. Now, if you want to specialize, you want to compete in powerlifting. Okay. Now we're going to specialize. There's some things we're going to learn. There's some things we're going to do that aren't going to transfer. Knowing how to set your arch and max out your bench is not necessarily the best activity for transference to athletic skills. It's specific to maxing out the bench for a powerlifting purpose. So for me, like I kind of don't worry about transfer, because I know that the things I've learned how to use my body better by applying some of these tension techniques, relaxation techniques, I know it makes me more effective at anything that I want to do. So it is opening up those doors and saying, this is a principle that you can take to any place you want to go. And that was, when Pavel wrote the book, The Naked Warrior, years ago, the concept was you should be able to drop me any place on the globe with no equipment, and I should be able to keep myself fit, keep myself together. The actual quote was from a spec ops person about, drop me naked in the jungle and I should still be able to make my way out and be successful. I'd be happier with my K-bar and my Glock and my flak jacket, but I can still make it if you drop me in, naked and with no equipment. So it is learning how to use yourself better, if we can talk about it in that fashion.
Got it. Do you want to insert your naked joke here, Perry? I can see you snickering like a fifth grader over there.
No, honestly, it's more like actually like a second or third grader. No, I'm just going with it. I'm just rolling with it right now. I'm just waiting. I'm patiently waiting for my turn.
That sniper's laying in the weeds, so just be ready, Jones. So let's take a step back and look at the most fundamental aspect of training. Like when I introduce myself to people on day one, I say, all right, let's take a step back and talk about how this whole thing works. It's basically, you're going to do something, your body's going to go, I don't know what the hell you just did, but if you're going to keep doing that, I have to get better at it. So if you lift heavy things, you're going to have to build the neurological adaptations and maybe even build some muscle to do it again. If you're going to go out and run, you're going to have to build a cardiovascular adaptation. So it's this stress and response cycle. So, we've talked about this, and I think you're really good at kind of dialing in what kind of creates these adaptations from mechanical to neurological to metabolic, and kind of what's happening and why it's happening.
Yeah, I think that, and this was actually a recent conversation I had with a group of graduating or senior people at a senior level in exercise science program at a particular university, which shall remain unnamed. And, they were almost kind of fighting against this idea of you need to understand the mechanical, neurological, and metabolic adaptations. Well, start with why. Why am I doing this? And I've said this for years at FMS workshops, StrongFirst workshops. If I walk into your training facility and I see you working with somebody and I say, why are you doing that exercise, that routine on the bike, that whatever it is, if I walk in and say, why are you doing that? And you're like, that's a problem. Like, why are you doing it? And when you break down the why from a training standpoint, if I am choosing to do a kettlebell swing protocol where I am hitting 5 powerful reps at the top of each minute, well, there's a specific, from a neurological standpoint, I know that I'm working more power and efficiency and power within that particular hip hinge activity. From a metabolic standpoint, I know that I'm practicing kind of an anti-glycolytic aerobic sort of protocol where I'm stimulating, from a metabolic standpoint, I'm stimulating this energy use and energy production, but then giving myself plenty of time to recover and replenish that so that the next set is just as powerful. And from a mechanical standpoint, I know that because I'm choosing a more athletic style hinge, I'm getting a better contribution from glutes, quads, and hamstrings. Whereas in some of the research, you can look at the idea that if I go with a more RDL style hinge, I would be getting a little more hamstring activity and maybe not as much quad or glute activation. And show me the athlete. If it's ACL prevention or post ACL, if it's an intervention post ACL injury or surgery, maybe targeting the hamstrings because semitendinosis and medial hamstring is seen to be very important in ACL prevention or mitigation strategies. Careful using the word prevention. And so, yeah, I think you should be able to very quickly go down the list and say, okay, this is the exercise I'm going to do. Cool. That can lead us in the direction of saying these are the mechanical responses that I'm looking for. This is going to be my work to rest ratio. That's going to lead us more in the direction of the metabolic sort of adaptations. And then from a neurological standpoint, I should know whether I'm working more strength, power, or that blend of strength and power, which we sometimes call strength endurance.
So now you're kind of sharpshooting for this specific response, and you know, in exercise science we call that SAID principle, specific adaptation to impose demand. And so the one thing that kind of flies in the face of that a little bit is, I know in StrongFirst and you and Pavel talk about something called the what the hell effect is, and kind of explain what that means and how that actually can be applied.
Yeah, the broadest strokes that I can put that under is you do swings and get-ups for a while, and then you have not been training pull-ups, but yet you come back and PR your pull-ups. You've added 2, 3, 4, 5 reps to your pull-ups, and you haven't been training them. That's the what the heck effect. Our former CEO and former SEAL, Eric Frohart, talks about the fact that he went on deployment, walking around very sandy places, and all he had to train with that he had brought in his kit at that time was a 24 kilo kettlebell, and he was doing the rite of passage, which is a lot of presses, a lot of snatches, and that was his training, because the focus was stay fit to do the nighttime walks and activities that they were involved in at that time, and be fresh enough to go do that and be an effective operator. Yet he comes home, he PRs his pull-ups, he PRs like bench, which he hasn't been training at all. And it's like, what the heck? And yeah, what the heck? I wish I had a more scientific explanation. Now, what I feel is that again, coming back to these principles and these techniques that transfer to any tool, that if you're better at using yourself, applying these strategies and high tension techniques with yourself and towards other objects, you're better at doing it with anything that's in your hands. And I think that the unique loaded eccentric that we get into has a carryover that is just far beyond what we would traditionally consider. We usually think very specific in our adaptations. And it's interesting, just to break it down a little bit, when we look at GPP in the States, GPP's like been boiled down to be Metcons and conditioning. Well, you look at the traditional Russian systems, GPP is everything. It's flexibility, mobility, strength, power, everything is GPP. Then you get into SPP, where if those are your special physical preparations, and that's where you're going to be working on a specific sports skill. I could be training a pitcher, and by the time I'm doing something that's specific for throwing, that's SPP for that person. Everything else is GPP. And then there's SPP too, but that's uber specialized. And now we're talking about shifting the grip slightly on a pitch to change how it's delivered. So I think that when you look at that GPP and you open the door to say, okay, it's not just conditioning, it's everything. Then something like a kettlebell swing, where I feel it's a tremendous power drill, because I know from an eccentric loading standpoint, two-handed swing, 24 kilo bell, I'm producing 3 to 3.5 times my body weight eccentric load at the bottom of that swing. That's a 53-pound weight giving me 3 times my body weight load at the bottom of that movement, because I know how to do a little bit of an overspeed eccentric and load that position. That's going to have carryover, both from a strength standpoint and a power standpoint. And then depending on my work rest ratios, it's going to give me a conditioning benefit as well, because I'm getting metabolic adaptations. So I think it's maybe the door swung too far in the direction of specificity. And you have to be doing exactly what you want to be good at. Well, that's assuming that your GPP has been kind of maxed out. If your GPP hasn't been maxed out, then yeah, getting stronger makes you better at everything else. So yeah.
Hey, everybody, a quick break in the action here. Hope you're enjoying the show, and we appreciate you listening. We're working hard to bring you the highest quality content and best guests every single week. So if you could do us a big favor and go and like and subscribe to the show on whatever platform you get your podcasts on, it would be greatly appreciated. Be sure to listen at the end of the show also to find out where you can find out more information about our courses, as well as a special discount code for all our listeners. Thanks again, and let's get back to the show. I want to chime in with two things off of that. The one, just a quick story, as I had a high school coach or football coach when I was consulting with the program, and I gave him his initial program, and he looked at it and he scans through, and there's no cleans on there. And you would have thought I stole his firstborn. And he's freaking out, and he's like, "We have no cleans. It's a quote unquote football lift. We need this." And so I said, "I don't think you do." And I said, I don't think you have the ability to implement and coach it well enough that you're going to get benefit. And there's just too much risk. At least that's what I see at the high school level when it's being implemented by a non-trained strength coach. And so I said, here's what you want to do. If you really want the cleans, I'll make a bet with you. You can test their clean. But I said, you're not going to clean. And then we're going to come back. You can retest it when we retest. And he calls me, 6 weeks later to the day, and he's jumping through the phone, and he's saying all our maxes went up through the roof. And he goes, but guess what went up the most? And I go, you don't have to tell me. Your cleans, right? And he said, yeah. And he goes, how did that happen? I said, well, we did that, and we saved a lot of wrists and a lot of low backs from high school kids just jumping and curling way more than they should. And they actually got what we wanted to, which is hip explosiveness. Now, here's the next thing on programming. Something you just said kind of tipped off a project that Mike and I are working on. We're working on a bonus chapter for our course and kind of building an algorithm, almost like the SFMA algorithm, but for programming. And when I stood there kind of just staring at the whiteboard for an hour or so, trying to figure out how to do this, the realization that came into my head is that for 90% of the people, it's just GPP. Right. So kind of like, Mike, if you want to chime in, or you guys, I want to just kind of pull the pin on that grenade and roll into the door. Like, most people are trying to, dazzle you with specific work, to your point, Brett, but 90% of the people just need GPP.
Yeah. Mike?
I agree. No, I'm just kidding. Well, I do agree, yes. But
they don't call him the best color man in the business for nothing.
Yeah, no, but so what this kind of takes me to is, I think when we talk about GPP, I think that's what CrossFit could have been, right? So you think about a lot of the Olympic lifts that were brought into the world of CrossFit, right? And whether you like, whether you like CrossFit or not, they did bring barbells to the masses. They did bring Olympic lifts, powerlifting. And the only thing I disagree with is the way that they were programmed. But I mean, if you kind of look at it, it was kind of a GPP type program where they had you doing a bunch of just different things. And again, I didn't agree necessarily with the way that it was originally programmed, but the thing that I did like about it is they had you running some days, they had you rowing, they had you, doing jump ropes, they had you doing body weight stuff. And really what everybody needs is that good GPP thing. And I think the biggest issue is people think that they're special so that they need something special for them. And yeah, I tell people all the time, like, if you want sports specific training, cool. Like, do this ladder drill once with the hockey stick in your hand, and now we're doing sports specific, right? It's the same damn drill. But like sometimes you have to actually just give people kind of a little bit of what they want. But I mean, honestly, I look at the guys that I work with, some of the best fighters in the UFC. It's at a certain point, it's just really good GPP because their SPP is their sport. So I don't need to get them better at Olympic lifts. Now, if I'm looking for a specific adaptation, could I use Olympic lifts? Absolutely. But I think people think that they're just light years ahead of what they truly are. And they want to think that they deserve or that they're capable of much more because, I mean, general physical preparedness, right? Like that's kind of a boring name, right? We want the butt kicking Metcons and the this and the that and, Pukey the clown and I'm special. So I need to be doing snatches. And I just, I think it comes down to ego. And I think that, the modern fitness industry is one of the biggest reasons why people think that they're a little bit better than they are because they think they can skip steps and go to the fancy stuff. So I'm a GPP guy. That's all I need. I work with a bunch of people that get paid with their body. They're GPP guys and their sport is their SPP. So I think we just all got to get better at GPP.
Yeah, one thing that I would ask you, Jones, is I really love how there's these progressions within the stuff that I've learned from Pavel is that you have to kind of earn it's almost like martial arts. You have to kind of earn your belts, and I've kind of stolen some of that in my program, especially when I'm working with high school kids. Is that we start off with some certain things that are ratios to body weight that I've kind of had this collection that they put together from between Dan John and Joe DeFranco and Chad Waterbury of these and Poliquin of these are some of the things you should be able to do. You should be able to do a reverse lunge with half your body weight in your hand. You should be able to do a 60-second straight arm hang and then go to a 30-second bent arm hang before we start really implementing pull-ups. Just some general guardrails to say, look, I have no problem with you doing chin-ups. Pass these tests. I have no problem with you bench pressing. Do this first. So tell me, let's talk a little bit about, before we jump into the conditioning stuff, talk about some of those guardrails and some of those progressions. Like, it's not that I don't like you or I don't like this lift. It's you need to do this first before I allow you to do this.
Yeah. And I'm going to circle back real quick on the kind of GPP conversation because the oxymoronic thing that, and I love oxymoronics. Anytime I can run into an oxymoronic, I'm going to use it. We're all unique snowflakes, but we need general programming. And so there's individualization that occurs. You mentioned, Mike, you're not above, giving the person what they want. Well, I'm not above subterfuge and deception either. At my age, it's all I've got. So the idea that I'm going to put the broccoli in the fruit smoothie to get you to do, eat your veggies so that, you'll enjoy it. I'm perfectly okay with that. So we're going to individualize, but we're going to be generic. And the reason that dichotomy or that oxymoronic thing can exist is the elite are just better at the basics than everybody else. That's a quote that we drew from a spec ops person. And so when you think you're good enough at a lift, you're not. I've been swinging a kettlebell for over 20 years. I'm still trying to get better at swinging a kettlebell. I've pressed a kettlebell a few times. I'm still trying to get better at pressing a kettlebell. So that kind of dichotomy between individualization and generalization, there are ways that plays very well when you're going with a GPP or a general approach. The standards that you're talking about, if you want to do X, I need Y. If I want you to swing a particular bell, I think you should be able to deadlift 2 times that. because like we talked about, you're going to get into some significant eccentric load. And that as a starting point, once you've started, the rules change, right? We're talking about just kind of entrance standards, not a more experienced individual. If you want to press something, I think you should be able to do a get up with it. Like I have some pretty simple metrics that tell me if you can't if you can't do a get up with this weight, why are you trying to press it? Because you should be able to support way more than you're moving. Bottoms up press versus military press, you should be within 50 to 60% of your max military press with a bottoms up press. And when you fall below that metric, you're probably your strength ability is outgunning your stability ability. And that's going to lead to some problems as you try to max that lift out. So for me, it's obviously very kettlebell based, since I haven't mentioned anything else. And it's interesting because, you know, some coaches will say, well, you need to be able to do X number of push-ups before you can do this. Well, I can get you dumbbell benching very light and build a lot of strength before you can ever really do good push-ups, because the push-up can be, as we know, complicated for many factors. But I can get you dumbbell bench pressing at a lightweight and build that pattern in a different way. So, you know, show me the person, show me what their goals are, then I'll give you some benchmarks and baselines. But having some benchmarks and baselines and being able to say, you know, pass this test, and then we proceed into that. I like your, you know, your dead hang and flexed arm hang before we really start getting into pull-ups. And that's what you see from people that skip steps. And this is where Gray says, I might skip steps, but I don't miss steps. And that's a very important distinction. I may run into an individual where I can skip some of my baselines because they've already achieved X, or I see that they're more advanced than their training age would indicate. But don't skip steps. That's an important distinction.
You know, is one thing that I always think about when it comes to sort of this rite of passage, and yes, I use that phrase on purpose because that was one of Pavel's original programs. But, you know, I think what happens with a lot of people when it comes to strength training is, you know, a lot of people, they get fired up, right? They take their dry scoop of pre-workout and they got all the stimulants in their body and they got their ammonia capsules and they crank out like a huge deadlift. But that's not a repeatable deadlift for them, right? That is just something that they got themselves completely fired up via a bunch of chemicals. And they think because they hit that deadlift on that specific day, that's their new sort of, you know, that's the way they should base everything off of. And I think that's what people do. They don't take the necessary steps. Like right now, I could put on a decent amount of weight and crank out a deadlift. It wouldn't look good, and I probably would be regretting it tomorrow. But yeah, I always think about what could you perform on like an average day, and I think that's where people need to start thinking about what they should be doing when it comes to their strength and conditioning, because everybody feels good on a good day. Right. Everybody's like, I'm killing it. The weights are moving. And yes, that might be a day based off of everything else that you may want to push it a little bit more. But I still think we need those necessary steps. And Brett, we've talked about sort of the lost art of progression and just taking your time to build up. Right. And I have to remind my fighters about this too. And we design their conditioning programs and we do their conditioning assessment. I'm like, remember, everything that we're going to do for the next 6 weeks is based off this assessment. So if you absolutely murder yourself to the point where you're throwing up and you can't do anything for the next 2 hours, it's going to be a long 6 months. And if I asked you to do this tomorrow, could you do it again? So there are, a few things that we need to consider when it comes to the overall idea of, a rite of passage and taking necessary steps. But we're talking about conditioning a little bit here. And, Brett, I know you're obviously
for just a second, because I think there's a couple of important things there. The journey's greater than the destination. When you're talking about strength training, it is what you develop, what you learn in the process, not that end lift. I can put you on an 8-week program and I don't care if you test out at the end. It can be a good proof of concept. Yes, it can prove that we've gotten stronger, but what you should have learned, developed, and gained in that journey is more important than that new PR. When you look at Westside Barbell, and obviously a very successful system, they had a max effort day. Well, what few people talk about as far as the max effort day is that max effort was to be done with zero psyching, zero getting fired up for the lift. You were supposed to walk up to the bar, hit the lift, and walk away, not bang your head on it and sniff your smelling salts and do the things that you were talking about. It's a very workman or manual labor sort of mindset. And if you've done manual labor and you have a 10-hour day of slinging gravel in front of you, you approach it differently than if you're saying, somebody says, well, how much gravel can you sling in 2 minutes? Well, to your point of the conditioning test where the person's puking and unable to do anything for 2 hours. Yeah, you hit that metric, but God, if we train you like that, you're going to just die. So I think if people would embrace the journey as being more important than the destination, I think strength training would look a lot different and more people would be happy with it. So then, yes, conditioning.
Well, to your point, Brett, I remember, I think it was in Verkhoshansky's book, talking about Eastern Bloc training, when the old Soviet lifters, they would keep heart rate monitors on them. And if they got too amped up to do a lift in their practice and their workouts, they'd pull them off the lift because they knew even if they hit that mark, it was going to set them back in all their training for the rest of that week. And they had things periodized out for 4 years to peak on one day. I don't really care if you peak today.
There was an interesting study that came out recently. I don't know if I sent it to you, but it was 3 sets of 8 with like a 5-minute rest in between sets, 6 sets of 4. So volume equated, intensity equated, both at 70 or 75%. The only thing that changed was the density, was the work rest ratios. 3 sets of 8 with like a 5-minute rest. 6 sets of 4 with a 2-minute rest. 6 sets of 4 with a 2-minute rest was better from a neurological, metabolic, and mechanical standpoint because recovery was much better. And this actually lines up with a lot of velocity-based research where you stop your sets when you drop 10% of velocity in a power-based and 20% velocity in a strength-based activity. And also, for some reason, sets of 4 comes up again within that velocity-based research. So this idea of pushing and maxing out and you want to be, you're trained to failure. I'm a recovered HIIT Jedi who used to think 1 set to failure was the secret to the universe. God, how wrong we were. But I think that yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but I think that piece of research is really interesting because of what you see from a recovery standpoint. And that's what you were seeing in the velocity-based research as well, is when they held to those metrics, those sets of 4 and those velocity drops, those people were ready to train again in 24 hours. The other people took 72 hours or more before they were fully recovered. To your point of the Verkhoshansky thing with the heart rate, where if you're too amped up, and you get that adrenaline dump and you're operating at that next level, you just PR'd. It's not a training effect. It has more than that.
That's awesome stuff. The only problem with that is what strength coach uses force? You're allowed. I only thought we were allowed to use 1, 3, 5, maybe 8 or 6 or 10.
I'm a big 7 programs. I use 7s and 4s all the time just to get people upset. 4s and 7s and 11s. People love 11s.
How many times did you get? Do they come with their chart saying, "Is this a mistake?"
Nope.
4.
You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it.
Yeah, exactly.
Anywho, let's talk about conditioning a little bit. So Brett's talking about strength. I think you like strength training. But I think a lot of people forget about the conditioning component, and you touched on it a little bit earlier with some of the sort of anti-glycolytic stuff. But so tell us how you sort of see the strength and the conditioning stuff working together And what do you think about when you're designing a traditional training program? Now, we're going to talk about sort of your other kettlebell stuff in a bit, but humor us for a little bit, Brett, because I know you you love talking shop on that stuff.
Well, you're alluding to the Iron Cardio program, I believe.
What do you? No, I'm just saying.
What? Who? I think that it's the water's gotten really muddy. There are things where you want to approach strength training as your strength training practice, and you want to approach conditioning as a conditioning practice. And, you know, that sort of, when we look at cardiovascular adaptations, when we look at metabolic adaptations, where things get really confusing when you try to use strength training sets of 8 in a particular lift in a circuit as a form of achieving your conditioning, there's some issues. Now, you can look at the research. There's research that says circuit training and doing these things has great aerobic, anaerobic benefits and strength training benefits and everything like that. The issue is when you generate tension, you restrict blood supply. You can't pump blood into a contracted muscle, or if you do, it's very little. And the volume load and pressure load that you get into from a cardiovascular standpoint when you're within that set means that you're not doing a really good job of getting your cardiovascular adaptations. Now, Pavel's been good to point out that there's peripheral adaptations in capitalization and metabolic benefits with the mitochondria and different things like that, where that's probably where we're getting the benefit in the circuit training, not just the pure cardiovascular standpoint. So again, it comes back to why. Why are we doing this? And what are you trying to get conditioned for? And where are your metrics? Like what's telling you that you need to use a particular protocol, or you're trying to get somebody fit for whatever it is. So the conditioning conversation still needs to come back to why, and then look at what tool are we going to choose that's going to be best for that. Now, I tend to think if we look at something like kettlebell swings or snatches or jerks, we see something that is strengthish, powerish, and conditioning-ish. And in that ish lives a pretty darn effective tool if work-rest ratios are set out appropriately. There's also a toggling between tension and relaxation within those. So we get a different blood response, got a different cardiovascular response by using those. I don't know if I answered your question, but I felt good saying it.
Hey, as long as you're feeling good, that's all we care about. That's at the end of the day, this is really about you and your needs.
Why, thank you.
We're good to go.
Ship shape.
So you happen to mention Iron Cardio, and that is your newest project. Kind of tell us what that is, and if I follow that, will I become a Adonis like you?
100%. It's guaranteed. Read the fine print. No, so this was an article that Pavel and Alexei Sinart put out back in 2014 called Strength Aerobics. And the idea in that article was take a 10 RM military press kettlebell and clean it, press it, squat it, set it down, shake it off, do the other side, and go for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Just kind of enjoy this kind of practice and using those lifts with kettlebell. And I'd been using some form of strength aerobics for really since that article came out, because it just kind of appealed to me. And I enjoyed doing it. I would go a little bit heavier, but that's because I'm a meathead. And so post cancer treatment, when I was coming back to training, I started with some body weight work and then tried to get back into my swings and get-ups. What I realized was I wasn't strong enough to really hit the ballistics. Or as I like to joke, I was strong enough to hurt myself because I know how to generate some tension, but my tissues were not ready for that sort of load. And so it was back to this strength aerobics protocol. Well, what started happening is I had about 30, 40 different variations that I had come up with. To give you an example, I did a workout the other day and I had to go back 6 months to find where I had repeated that exact session. And I've been training pretty consistently. So there's a lot of variation that's possible within this routine. So what I started to develop was this kind of iron cardio protocol where it's consistently variable, coming back to one of my favorite oxymoronics. And so we're really training a small list of exercises: cleans, presses, squats, snatches. But we're doing it in a kind of a constantly varied way, where I'm manipulating the variables. The sets need to be short. Coming back to the conversation on using strength training as a cardiovascular sort of adaptation, and the iron cardio name is I don't know, call it clickbait if you want. I'm not so concerned with the pure cardiovascular adaptations, but the fact that we're cycling from a ballistic to a grind, from an upper body grind to a lower body grind, and I'm keeping my breathing pattern going, I think we avoid a lot of those fears and a lot of those issues with using strength training for cardiovascular adaptations. Then if I'm using my work rest ratios right, and hitting my relaxation drills in between to return blood flow and help move metabolic waste and things like that, then I'm getting some pretty good conditioning effects as well. So short story long, it's helped me go from struggling with a 24 kilo for 20 sets to using a 36 and 40 kilo for 60 sets. 36 kilo for 60 sets, and the 40 I've hit for about 30 sets. So, that sort of progression, I've built a lot of strength. I went from the low post-cancer treatment was about 164 body weight. I lost over 40 pounds in the course of treatment. I'm back up around 190 and feeling, strong and capable. And it's been a lot of work on that protocol.
Awesome. And then for the person who's using it, kind of going to it, like in terms of what to expect, is this something that I'm looking at using a heart rate monitor for? Is this something that I can customize, based on my goal or based on my time and availability? To kind of tell us a little bit about what someone needs to do to prep to best get the best effects out of this.
So I'm a minimalist. I collect almost zero data. And if it wasn't for the little notebook that I use to make my little tick marks, I wouldn't have any records as far as what I'm doing with my training. I do have people that have used a heart rate monitor as a means of saying I'm ready for my next set. I get along without it, using the talk test and using my feeling on RPE and my ability to hit the next press, because I do go heavier in my iron cardio work than the original recommendation was a 10 RM bell. I'm probably centered around a 5 or 6 RM bell, and sometimes even a 3 RM or heavier bell. I have no clue how many times I could press a 40, or I don't even know if I can press the 44. Probably could, but I can do the 40 kilo within a weight ladder. I can get 20 to 25 sets in with a 40 kilo. So my ability to hit the next press and know from an RPE standpoint that press is in the bag, never going to failure. That's an important metric for me, just looking at between set recovery. Time-wise, what do you got time for? You got 20 minutes? Cool, it works. You got time to go for an hour? It works. Like, what do you ask not what iron cardio can do for you? So, but it is an extremely adaptable routine to whatever you have going on. I'm a very intuitive trainer. I should say I'm a very intuitive trainee. Being how I program myself is I look at my notebook and go, what do I want to do today? And I make up a variation. Something will click in my head where I'm like, ooh, yeah, that sounds good for today. And there's times where I'm like, yeah, that wasn't a good idea. And there's times where I'm like, God, that was perfect. Like that, what a great session. So yeah, it's extremely adaptable.
To your point, Ferry, in the course, you talk about the baker and the cook, and Brett is definitely the chef and the cook, not the baker in that situation. Perry, any closing thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
No, Brett, it's always good to chat with you, buddy. Thank you for sharing. We appreciate you. And I was going to say something snarky and relatively funny, but we'll save that for a later date.
Oh, you disappoint me. No, it's
fantastic.
True story. It's great to have a chance to be on with you guys. Love what you're doing with the Principles Program Design, and look forward to everything that you guys are putting out, and honored to have a chance to be on the show. Thank you.
No, absolutely appreciate the opportunity. And I would be remiss if I didn't also talk about, we have a podcast here talking about strength, and I brought this up before, but because we had Gwen Lawrence on, who's the yoga instructor, works with a bunch of teams. She was with me with the Giants, and she's also a cancer survivor. So we have two guys here who've part of a club that I hope to never be part of, but I am completely in awe of. And we talk about real strength is not lifting a kettlebell or barbell. It's what these two guys have done and shown, and kind of leading people through their journey and being an inspiration. So both of you guys are absolute rock stars and heroes to me on that end. So I am honored to call you colleagues and friends, and it is always a good time when we get together. Hopefully we could do it in person sometime soon. But we want to thank everybody for listening. Thank you, Mr. Jones. And if you just can't get enough of these two sexy bald men, they also have a podcast. Do you want to give a quick plug here, Terry? Terry, whatever your name is.
Terry. My name is Terry, and I have a podcast. It's called Terry and Brett's Podcast. It's an amazing podcast. We talk with a lot of people that rhyme with Terry. It's fantastic. Actually, it's called the Minimum Effective Dose Podcast, and you can listen to Brett and I ramble about sometimes training, but a lot of the times it does end up with movie quotes and a bunch of sarcasm. But no, Minimum Effective Dose, you can find that just about everywhere.
Fantastic.
Definitely.
And with that, we will wrap things up here for episode number 23 of the Principles of Performance podcast.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to the Principles of Performance podcast. If you've enjoyed our content, please like and share on your social media outlets, as well as subscribe and give us a review on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your preferred platform is to listen to. For more information on the Principles of Program Design courses and workshops, visit us at www.principlesofprogramdesign.com and follow us on all of the social media channels where we post new content every day. To save 10% on any PPD courses, enter the discount code PRINCIPLESPODCAST10 at checkout. If you have any questions we can answer or suggestions for the show, you can email us at info@principlesofprogramdesign.com or message us on social media. Thank you again for your support.